On the first date, what were some immediate red flags that made you not go on a second date? At dinner, he shared with me that he didn't believe in washing his hands after going to the bathroom. As long as toilet paper was used effectively, hand washing was obsolete. He said all of this while licking his fingers and digging into a shared basket of appetizers. I was disgusted. It made me cancel the first date we had planned. I met a guy on a dating site and he asked me on a date and I agreed. Later, I got a call from work saying a package had been delivered. It was a huge bouquet of flowers. I was so confused. I asked him if he had sent them and he said, "I did. You said you had a bad day last Friday, so I wanted to make this Friday a good one for you." Normally, I would absolutely love this gesture and be over the moon with this. The only problem is that I never told him where I worked and I had told him I lived in a large city an hour away to be on the safe side. So not only did he find my true town but also found out where I had worked. Instant red flag and made me terrified. She pulled out a switchblade mid-conversation to slice up a passing ant. He was about 10 years older than his pictures, he didn't stop twitching the entire time, and he kept pressuring me to go back to his place. I noped the fuck out of there. Made multiple comments about my appearance, to be fair they were positive but delivered in a very creepy and shallow way. He also told me about how he was arrested in front of his old apartment and then evicted. After I told him I did not wish to go on a second date, his response was, "Okay, but first I really want to F your brains out." This was a first date and I was 19. Some comments include, "I bet you work out. I bet you look in the mirror and just think, damn, if I were you I'd check myself out all the time." I went on a date with a guy who called himself a mama's boy and said no woman would ever compare to his mother. There was no second date, and despite how many times I turned him down and said I wasn't interested, he kept calling and texting me for 2 years until I changed my number. Went out with a girl who only talked about her ex-husband and his porn addiction. After listening for 2 hours about his Asian porn collection, I left as fast as I could. One guy the first reluctantly met up with once turned out to be a Nazi magician. He praised the guy with the small mustache and denied the Holocaust. That was the conversation he opened with and said immigrants shouldn't be allowed in the country anymore. This was bad enough without noting that I am an immigrant. And so was he. He then proceeded to bend a spoon with his mind and pressured me into solving an impossible riddle. All this in maybe an hour, which I had stayed for purely out of morbid curiosity. Then he said I wasn't what he was looking for because I was too cold to be the future mother of his children. Then he asked if I wanted to come home with him. I'm still in disbelief he brought his 2-year-old along on our date. He then informed me he would be okay with me going out and partying for maybe 1 more year to get it out of my system, but after that he expected me to settle down. Then went on a strange rant about how important it is for women to have their fun before becoming moms so they are ready to be homemakers. I was 19 and also was not aware he even had a kid beforehand. I once went on a first date with a guy who was clearly not over his ex. He spent the entire time talking about her, comparing me to her, and even showing me pictures of them together. It was a huge red flag for me and made it clear that he wasn't ready for a new relationship. He actually took a call from her when we were waiting for our food to arrive. And when he was done, I asked if he wanted to call her back and invite her to join us. He said no because she'd have to bring her kid. Needless to say, I didn't go on a second date with him. This all happened during our first and last date. It literally kept getting worse one after the other. When they brought the food, he immediately asked them to remake it as it was not cooked exactly how he wanted. And then he also returned the remade one and just ordered something else. His phone suddenly lit up and I see a picture of 2 young girls. Asked if they were his niece and he said it is his 2-year-old and 4-year-old daughter, which he never mentioned to me, even after I asked if he has any kids. He then told me he still lives with his baby mama, ex, and has no near plan of them living apart. Oh, and they still live in his parents' basement. He then randomly started talking about how much he hates the left wing because it doesn't favor white men like himself. And then proceeded to talk about how immigrants ruined this country. I'm Middle Eastern and my parents are immigrants, lol. We talked about traveling and very nonchalantly he says, "You probably have to leave so much earlier for the airport because of security." I asked what he meant and with no word of a lie he goes, 9/11. Gotta be extra safe, Backhanded low-key racism type of red flag. At that point, the red flags turned into checkered flags telling me to end it and leave. So without any further responses from me, I grabbed my coat, thanked him for the free meal and walked out. I went out for drinks with a guy who monologued the entire time. Could barely get a word in, it was the worst, and as an extra bonus, he was referring to himself in the third person. Just why? I had a first date, he pull out his gun in the middle of a Starbucks to try and show it off to me. I was 18 years old at the time, I had no interest in guns. I was actually half mortified and half terrified. The date went fine, but on the drive back he got into a road rage. He started blasting through red lights and speeding and yelling. I told him that I'm not putting my life in danger over a hissy fit from a grown-ass man. Went out with a girl. We hit it off well to the point that things heated up and I spent the night at her place, only to wake up to an empty house and no clothes. She had taken all of my clothes, including my underwear, with her to work. When I asked her why, she said she didn't want me to leave before she got home from work. We met up at his place. He was making dinner for me. We were chatting on the couch when he stood up to excuse himself to the restroom. As he was walking away, he turned and mentioned the cameras all over his home, so don't steal anything. Then he pointed to a stack of papers on an end table. I believe in honesty. That's my arrest record. Everything is right there. He went on his way. I considered leaving right then but didn't. I did pick up that stack of papers. Holy shit. His arrest record was several pages long and spanned 3 states. Most of the arrests were for domestic violence. There were a couple involving weapons, some minor drug charges and assault charges. He returned and, thank God, my phone rang. I answered it even though I didn't recognize the number, had no idea who it was. I made like it was one of my daughters and she needed to be picked up from somewhere immediately. I'll never know who was actually on the other end of that call, but I left this guy's home and never looked back. I will admit I casually ignored some red flags before our date. But the camera tale, I don't believe for a minute he had cameras everywhere and the criminal history wouldn't allow me to ignore what I already felt. He tried to change my order with the waitress because I didn't order what he'd recommended. He suggested something, but I wasn't feeling it. I ordered, and he grabbed the waitress as she tried to walk away, and said no, she'll have what I suggested instead, thanks. And let her go, and that was that. It didn't even occur to him that she wouldn't listen or that I'd be pissed. Walked right out of the restaurant. Met up with this guy from Tinder. After talking for a bit and having a coffee, he was like, want to meet my kid? I felt totally put on the spot, and although I was clearly uncomfortable, I panicked and said I would. We went back to his place and I met the kid. She was actually pretty cool. Then he sent her off to bed and proceeded to tell me that the mother of his child randomly dropped dead in their kitchen one day, and now his kid didn't have a mom. I looked around his place and there were pictures of said dead mom everywhere. I told him it was getting late and I was going to get going. Before I left, he asked if he could stroke my stomach and pinch my butt. It was a very specific and super odd request. I said no. The next day he sent me a text asking me if I would babysit his kid. Not even asking me on a second date, just asking for childcare. Hey, if you like the video so far, consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video for more. Another great one. I went on a date with a Korean American guy in college, and it was really lovely. Until his mother called during our coffee date. She asked him what my name was and he told her, first and last. He got a sad look on his face and stood up, apologizing profusely for wasting my time. He said, I am so sorry, I should have had her look you up before the date. Super confused, I looked at him and asked, what are you talking about? Apparently, he didn't realize my name was Japanese American. I am biracial but white passing, and his mother saw my Facebook profile. At the time was me and my family at the Obon festival hosted by the Buddhist Temple and Japanese American Society in my city. So he left the date because his mommy told him he couldn't date a Japanese girl. Explained everything to me like I had just arrived on the planet. Explained how exchange rates work. Explained how package holidays work. Explained parking. Explained that it's cheaper to have roommates, and learned so much. She and I were sitting in a club when a guy she knew walked by and waved. He said, hi, Kate. Haven't seen you in a while, and walked on. She yelled after him, yeah, but do you think about me when you jack off? The whole club came to a record scratch halt and stared at her. Then, fearing the people on the street out front hadn't heard her, she repeated, I said, do y'all think about me when you jack off? I made it an early night. Not entirely red flags but just some small world things that made that first date the last one. For context, before the date, I picked him up. He was in a wheelchair. He lost his leg in a motorcycle accident a few years back and had recently had surgery on his leg because of bone spurs. He normally has a prosthetic. We went out for breakfast. Everything seemed fine, no major issues with him. When it came time to pay, his card was declined. He called his dad, who was also his boss, to figure out why his paycheck hadn't been deposited. The conversation went back and forth and I ended up paying and he promised to pay me back. It totally wasn't a big deal, it happens, I get it. So we get back to my car and he made a comment about the last time he was around an SUV. It was his motorcycle accident. He hit one that was pulling out of a restaurant and that's when he lost his leg. For some reason that triggered a memory of a conversation I had with my mom a while back about my aunt who had the same car which was totaled during an accident. I was texting him and asked him a few more questions about the accident, where it happened and such. Long story short, it was my aunt who was driving the car that pulled out of the restaurant and he hit into. He was currently in the process of suing her because of it, despite the fact that he was going almost double the speed limit at the time and didn't even have his license. Needless to say, there was no second date, and he never did pay me back for breakfast. You can share your own story down in the comment below, and thanks for watching the video.